My unfaithful wife went traveling and texted me daily about how much she loved me and the kids. So I decided to visit her unexpectedly. But when we entered the resort, we spotted her with her ex. Our son asked what was happening. She still doesn't know we saw her, but soon she'll learn about our little sabotage and realize she made a terrible mistake. Hey everyone, my name is David, and I've been married to Victoria for 9 years now. We first met during graduate school, where she immediately caught my attention with her brilliant mind and ambitious spirit. She was deeply passionate about pharmaceutical research, and I found myself falling for her hard and fast. After dating for 3 years, we decided to tie the knot. Soon after our wedding, we were blessed with 2 beautiful children. Sophie is now 8 years old, and Nathan just turned 6. I work as a marketing consultant and made the decision to go remote 4 years ago because I wanted to be more present in our children's lives. Meanwhile, Victoria continued climbing the corporate ladder at a major pharmaceutical company, establishing herself as a rising star in her field. Her position occasionally required business travel, but it was never excessive, typically no more than a week at a time. When she was home, Victoria was completely devoted to being a mother. She would throw herself into bedtime stories, homework help, and weekend activities with the kids. I genuinely believed we had built a strong partnership together, balancing our careers and family life in a way that worked for everyone. That belief held strong until everything changed 4 months ago. Victoria came home one evening practically glowing with excitement. She explained that her company needed someone to oversee the setup of a new research partnership, and this partnership was with a prestigious laboratory in Amsterdam, Netherlands. The opportunity would require a 7-week stay abroad, which was significantly longer than her usual business trips. "This is a huge opportunity," she explained to me that night, her eyes bright with ambition. "Leading this project could fast-track me for the director position I've been working toward." Of course, I was supportive of her career advancement. We spent the evening working out all the childcare arrangements and logistics. I adjusted my work schedule to be even more available for Sophie and Nathan during her absence. While it would certainly be challenging managing everything alone for 7 weeks, we both agreed we could make it work. As I drove her to the airport on departure day, Victoria seemed emotional about leaving. "I'm going to miss you and the kids terribly," she said, squeezing my hand. "But I promise I'll call every night to check in with everyone." And true to her word, she did call every single night like clockwork. The children would eagerly crowd around my phone, their faces lighting up as they saw their mother's face on the screen, and heard about her adventures in Amsterdam. Every single call followed the same heartwarming pattern. Victoria would end each conversation by telling us, "I miss you and the kids so much it's killing me." Sometimes I could see tears forming in her eyes as she said those words, which made the separation feel even more difficult for all of us. She would blow kisses to Sophie and Nathan through the screen and make heart shapes with her hands, gestures that the children absolutely ate up. Sophie, in particular, became completely invested in her mother's return, even starting to count down the days until mommy would come home. However, about 4 weeks into Victoria's trip, I began to notice something had changed. The nightly calls continued as promised, but they started becoming noticeably shorter than before. Victoria seemed distracted during our conversations, often appearing distant or preoccupied. She began taking many of these calls from her hotel balcony, rather than from inside her room. When I asked her about this change in location, she would offer explanations that seemed reasonable enough. "The room is too noisy from housekeeping," she'd say, or "I need better reception out here." I didn't think much of it initially, assuming the stress of managing such an important project was simply taking its toll on her. When I tried to ask Victoria about the specifics of her work and how the partnership was progressing, her answers became increasingly vague and non-committal. "It's complicated, and I'm exhausted from explaining technical details all day," she would tell me with a weary sigh. "I just want to relax and talk to my family when I call you guys." My suspicions began to grow more serious when Victoria started declining our video calls altogether. She would call as usual, but insisted on voice-only conversations, offering what seemed like flimsy excuses for avoiding the camera. "The lighting in here is terrible," she'd say, or "My hair is such a mess today," or "I have a splitting migraine and can't handle looking at the screen brightness." It was actually Sophie who inadvertently planted the seed for what would happen next. During one of our bedtime routines, she looked up at me with her innocent 8-year-old eyes and asked, "Daddy, can we surprise Mommy in Amsterdam like they do in the movies?" The idea immediately took root in my mind and refused to let go. Victoria still had 3 weeks remaining on her trip, and it so happened that the kids had a scheduled school break coming up. I had accumulated plenty of vacation time from work, and most importantly, I felt a growing need to know the truth about what was really happening in Amsterdam. I didn't tell anyone about my plan except for my parents, who readily agreed to watch our cat while we were away. I quickly booked flights and reserved a hotel room near where Victoria was staying in Amsterdam. I told myself this was simply an adventure for the kids, a chance for them to see a beautiful European city and surprise their mother. But deep down, I knew exactly what I was really doing. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. We arrived in Amsterdam on a sunny Thursday morning, and my plan was straightforward. We would rest up from the flight, explore the city a little bit, and then surprise Victoria at her hotel the following day. Sophie kept asking excitedly, "Is Mommy going to be so excited when she sees us?" And I assured her, she's going to be the most excited ever, even as I felt a growing knot forming in my stomach. That afternoon, I decided I needed to do some reconnaissance before our big surprise. I left the kids with the hotel's babysitter service for about an hour, promising to bring back some authentic Dutch stroopwafels for them to try. I took a taxi to Victoria's hotel, which turned out to be a luxurious canal-side property where her company had arranged for her extended stay accommodations. I didn't plan to approach Victoria or reveal myself just yet. My goal was simply to confirm that she was actually staying at this hotel and to get a sense of the layout for our surprise visit the next day. I asked the taxi driver to wait while I walked through the lobby, pretending to be meeting someone there. That's when I saw her through the large windows that overlooked the canal terrace. I spotted Victoria immediately. Her distinctive blonde hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and her sunglasses were perched casually on top of her head. She was wearing a green dress that I had never seen before, sitting at a canal-side cafe table enjoying what appeared to be a leisurely afternoon. But Victoria wasn't alone. A tall, tan man with dark hair was sitting beside her at the table. As I watched, frozen in place and feeling my heart begin to race, I saw him touch and caress her arms. This wasn't the kind of friendly, professional touch you'd expect between business colleagues. It was the intimate kind of touch that told me everything I needed to know about their relationship. I watched as Victoria threw her head back, laughing at something he had said, her hand coming to rest comfortably on his chest. In that moment, I felt physically ill. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet, and the world around me became surreal. A hotel employee noticed my distress and approached to ask if I needed assistance. Somehow, I managed to shake my head and force myself to walk back to the waiting taxi, my mind reeling from what I had just witnessed. I spent that entire night in a complete daze, mechanically going through the motions of dinner and bedtime stories with Sophie and Nathan. While I was outwardly present for them, my mind was racing uncontrollably. I found myself replaying our entire 9 years of marriage, desperately searching for signs and red flags that I might have missed along the way. The betrayal felt so profound that I questioned everything I thought I knew about our relationship. The next morning, Sophie woke up absolutely bursting with excitement about surprising her mother. I couldn't bring myself to cancel our plans, not yet anyway. Part of me genuinely needed to see Victoria's reaction when she was confronted with her deception face to face. But if I'm being completely honest, another part of me, the part I'm not particularly proud of, wanted her to see the hurt and confusion that would inevitably appear in our children's eyes when they witnessed the tension. We arrived at Victoria's hotel around 11:30 in the morning, and the concierge immediately smiled at the children's obvious excitement and anticipation. "We're here to surprise my wife in room 412, I explained to him, trying to keep my voice steady and normal. "Oh, Mrs. Thompson," the concierge said brightly. "I believe she's currently out by the canal terrace. Would you like me to call her room first to let her know you're here?" "No," I said quickly, perhaps a bit too sharply. "The surprise is the whole point of our visit." The concierge directed us through the elegant lobby toward the canal terrace area. Sophie skipped ahead of us, pulling Nathan excitedly by the hand, while I followed a few steps behind them with my heart pounding violently in my chest. I knew what we were about to find, but I wasn't prepared for how it would feel to watch my children discover it too. And there Victoria was again, just as I had seen her the day before. This time, she wasn't sitting at the cafe table, but rather lounging comfortably on a terrace chair. Her green dress was drawing appreciative eyes from other guests around the terrace, and on the chair beside her sat the same man from yesterday, now with his arm draped casually and possessively over her shoulders. As we approached, I watched the exact moment when Sophie spotted her mother. Her little face absolutely lit up with pure, unfiltered joy. She broke into a full run toward Victoria, her voice carrying across the terrace as she screamed, "Mommy!" with the kind of happiness that only an 8-year-old can express. What happened next is burned into my memory forever. Every detail crystal clear, even now. Victoria's head snapped up at the sound of Sophie's voice, and her sunglasses immediately fell from her head into her lap. I watched as the color completely drained from her face when she saw our daughter running toward her, followed closely by Nathan and then by me. The man beside her looked utterly confused, his arms still positioned around her shoulders as he tried to process what was happening. Victoria jumped up from her chair as if it had suddenly electrocuted her, nearly knocking over a drink in the process. Her movements were frantic and panicked as she tried to compose herself. "Sophie, Nathan," she managed to say, but her voice was barely audible and filled with shock. Then her eyes met mine across the terrace, and I could see the full weight of the situation crashing down on her. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of surprise and growing dread. Before I could formulate any kind of response, Sophie had reached her mother and thrown her small arms around Victoria's waist in an enthusiastic hug. Nathan quickly followed suit, wrapping his arms around her legs with the innocent joy of a 6-year-old who had just been reunited with his mother. "We surprised you, Mommy," Sophie exclaimed with pure delight. "Just like in the movies. We came because you were sad and missing us so much." I watched as Victoria awkwardly patted both children's heads, her eyes frantically darting between them, me, and the man who was now standing beside her looking increasingly uncomfortable with each passing second. The entire situation was spiraling out of control, and she clearly had no idea how to handle it. That's when Sophie, with the innocent curiosity that only children possess, turned to look directly at the man. Her small brow furrowed in obvious confusion as she processed his presence. She tugged on Victoria's hand and stage whispered loud enough for everyone in the immediate vicinity to hear, "Mommy, that's not Daddy!" The canal terrace, which had already grown quiet from the disruption our arrival had caused, seemed to go completely silent. Every conversation stopped, and I could feel the eyes of other guests turning toward our family drama. Victoria's face contorted into an expression I had never seen before, a devastating mixture of panic, shame, and rising anger all twisted together. "Kids, this is a colleague, Dr. Rodriguez," Victoria managed to say, her voice shaking as she tried to maintain some semblance of control. "He's part of the research team I'm working with here in Amsterdam." Dr. Rodriguez, clearly recognizing the gravity of the situation, extended his hand toward me in what seemed like an attempt at damage control, but I completely ignored his gesture. Instead, I knelt down to Sophie and Nathan's eye level, speaking to them in as calm a voice as I could manage. "Kids, why don't you go over to that nice lady at the drink station and ask for 2 orange juices?" I said gently. "I need to talk to Mommy for just a minute, okay?" After they reluctantly walked away, casting confused glances back at us, I turned to face Victoria directly. I kept my voice low but firm, ensuring that our conversation wouldn't become even more of a public spectacle than it already was. "We're leaving," I told her without any room for negotiation. "The kids and I are going back to our hotel, and then we're flying home tomorrow. You have exactly that long to decide what you're going to tell them about why you're choosing to stay here in Amsterdam." "David, please," Victoria began, tears immediately forming in her eyes as the reality of the situation hit her. "This isn't what it—" "Don't!" I cut her off sharply, my voice carrying a finality that surprised even me. "Just don't. Not here. Not in front of everyone." Dr. Rodriguez muttered something unintelligible in Dutch and quickly stepped away from our confrontation, clearly wanting no part whatsoever in the family drama that was unfolding before him. His retreat only made the situation more awkward and obvious to the other guests who were still watching our exchange. Victoria grabbed my arm desperately, her grip tight and pleading. "You can't just take the kids and leave like this," she said, her voice rising slightly. "We need to talk about this situation properly." "No," I replied firmly, pulling away from her grasp and taking a step back. "What we needed was for you not to lie to your family for weeks on end. What we needed was for you not to cheat on your husband while telling your children every single night how much you miss them." Her face immediately hardened at my words, and I could see her shifting from desperation into defensive anger. "You had no right to come here without telling me," she shot back. "This is completely unfair and manipulative." I actually laughed at that accusation, a hollow, bitter sound that surprised even me with its harshness. "That's incredibly rich coming from you, Victoria," I said, shaking my head in disbelief at her audacity. "The kids and I will be staying at Hotel Amsterdam Plaza until tomorrow evening," I continued, my voice returning to a calm, controlled tone. "The ball's in your court now. You can figure out how you want to handle this. I then collected Sophie and Nathan, who were standing by the drink station looking confused and increasingly upset by the obvious tension they had witnessed between their parents. As we walked away from the terrace, I heard Sophie ask in her small, innocent voice, "Daddy, why is Mommy crying? Isn't she happy to see us?" That single question from my 8-year-old daughter broke something fundamental inside me. The pure confusion and hurt in her voice made me realize just how much damage Victoria's actions were going to cause to our children's understanding of family, trust, and love. The weight of having to explain this situation to them in an age-appropriate way felt almost overwhelming. Victoria came to our hotel that evening, and she came alone. She asked if we could speak privately first before involving the children in any conversation, so I arranged for Sophie and Nathan to have dinner with the hotel's babysitter service in the restaurant downstairs. This would give us the privacy we needed to have what I knew would be a difficult and emotional discussion. In the quiet of our hotel room, Victoria completely broke down. She alternated between tearful apologies and desperate justifications for her behavior, her emotions swinging wildly as she tried to find some way to minimize the damage. "It just happened," she claimed through tears, her voice desperate and pleading. "Rodriguez and I were working these incredibly late nights together, and there was this undeniable chemistry between us. I never planned for any of this to occur." 7 weeks of "it just happened?" I interrupted, my voice heavy with disbelief and growing anger. 7 weeks of lying to me and our children every single night while you looked them in the eyes and told them how much you missed them? Victoria's face crumpled as she realized her explanation wasn't working. She finally admitted that the affair with Dr. Rodriguez had actually started 3 weeks into her trip to Amsterdam. She insisted repeatedly that it wasn't serious, trying to downplay the significance of what had occurred. It was just a connection that got intensified by the romantic setting and the distance from home, she explained, as if that somehow made it more acceptable. "I love you and the kids more than anything," she pleaded, reaching for my hands. "This was a terrible mistake, the worst mistake I'll ever make in my life, and I'll regret it forever. You have to believe that." But I had a question that had been burning inside me since witnessing that scene on the canal terrace. It was a question I dreaded asking, but I knew I needed to hear the answer. "Is this the first time, Victoria?" I asked, watching her face carefully. "Have there been other affairs?" Her hesitation told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth to respond. The brief pause, the way her eyes flickered away from mine, the slight change in her breathing, it all confirmed my worst fears. "There was one other time," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was at a conference in Boston last year, but it was just one night, and I ended it immediately afterward. I swear to you, David, I ended it right away." 2 affairs that I now knew about definitively. But as I sat there processing this information, I couldn't help but wonder how many more there might have been that I didn't know about. How many business trips, conferences, and late work nights had actually been cover stories for infidelity? We talked for hours that night, going in circles as she begged for another chance. Victoria promised counseling, complete transparency, and anything else I could possibly want if I would just consider trying to save our marriage. She was willing to do whatever it took to rebuild the trust she had shattered. But as I watched her cry in that sterile hotel room with her mascara running and her voice hoarse from pleading, all I could see was the image of her laughing by the canal with her lover. I kept thinking about Sophie counting down the days until Mommy came home, completely unaware that her mother was living a double life in Amsterdam. After our long, painful conversation, Victoria spent some time with the children. Sophie and Nathan were confused by the obvious tension between their parents, but they were relieved to see us speaking civilly to each other. We agreed to tell them that Mommy's work project was finishing up earlier than expected, but that she needed to stay a few more days for final meetings and wrap-up tasks. We promised them she would be home the following week exactly as originally planned. That night, after Victoria had left our hotel and the kids were finally asleep, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to make a dramatic scene or blow up our lives with some messy public confrontation. No. I was going to be strategic, calculated, and absolutely ruthless in my approach. We returned home the next day as planned, and I maintained a careful facade of normalcy for Sophie and Nathan's sake. While they resumed their regular routines of school and activities, I was secretly working behind the scenes. I discreetly contacted a divorce attorney and began the process of gathering all of our financial records. I meticulously documented Victoria's admission of multiple affairs, creating a detailed timeline of everything that had transpired in Amsterdam. My attorney provided me with some sobering realities about Florida's legal system. She explained that Florida's no-fault divorce laws meant that Victoria's affairs might not significantly impact our financial settlement. However, she also pointed out some potentially crucial factors that could work in my favor. Victoria's high-powered career and frequent travel schedule could potentially influence custody arrangements, especially when combined with the documented affairs. More importantly, my attorney noted that my established role as the primary caregiver could be a significant advantage. Since I had been working remotely for the past 4 years, specifically to be more present for our children, I had a strong foundation for arguing for primary physical custody. I made the deliberate decision not to share my plans with anyone, not even my closest friends or family members. To the outside world, I was simply a devoted husband, eagerly awaiting his wife's return from an extended business trip. I played this role perfectly, maintaining normal interactions with neighbors, friends, and colleagues. Victoria continued calling every night as promised, speaking first to the children and then to me. Her conversations with Sophie and Nathan were filled with forced cheerfulness, but I could hear the strain in her voice. When she spoke to me privately, that cheerfulness dissolved into pleading desperation. She was clearly hoping that time and distance might soften my resolve. I responded to her overtures with carefully non-committal phrases. "We'll talk when you're home," I would say. Or, "Let's focus on the kids right now." Or, "I'm still processing everything that happened." Meanwhile, I was executing my strategic plan with methodical precision. First, I contacted a private investigator who had been recommended by my attorney. If there had been other affairs beyond the two Victoria had admitted to, I wanted proper documentation and evidence. I couldn't shake the feeling that what I had discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. Second, I quietly moved half of our joint savings into a separate account under my name only. My attorney assured me this was perfectly legal to do before divorce proceedings officially began, and it would protect those funds from being hidden or moved by Victoria when she inevitably realized what was happening. Third, I began creating detailed documentation of everything related to our children's daily care. I meticulously recorded school pickups and drop-offs, doctor appointments, extracurricular activities, playdates, and every other aspect of their routine care. I created a comprehensive spreadsheet that clearly showed I was handling approximately 75% of all childcare responsibilities, even before Victoria's extended trip to Amsterdam. Finally, I set up security cameras throughout our home. I was careful to place them only in common areas like the living room, kitchen, and hallways, nothing in private spaces like bedrooms or bathrooms. Florida is a two-party consent state for audio recording, but video recording without audio in your own home is completely permitted. I wanted evidence of my active parenting and documentation of any potential confrontations when Victoria returned. As the days passed while Victoria remained in Amsterdam, I felt a strange sense of calm descending over me. The initial shock and overwhelming pain were still very much present, but they had now been channeled into purposeful action. I was no longer the betrayed husband flailing around in emotional chaos. I had become someone with a clear plan and the determination to see it through. Victoria returned home on a Saturday morning, exactly as scheduled. The children were absolutely ecstatic, rushing to the front door the moment they heard her key turning in the lock. I deliberately stood back, watching this reunion with a sense of detached interest, as if I were observing someone else's family rather than my own. Victoria looked exhausted when she walked through the door. There were dark circles under her eyes that were only partially concealed with makeup, and her usual confident demeanor seemed diminished. She hugged Sophie and Nathan tightly, tears streaming down her face as she told them over and over how much she had missed them during her time away. When she finally looked up at me over the children's heads, I gave her a small, neutral nod. "Welcome home," I said simply, my voice giving away nothing of what I was thinking or feeling. The rest of that day was entirely devoted to the children, and Victoria threw herself into mothering with an intensity that seemed almost desperate. She had brought them gifts from Amsterdam, traditional Dutch wooden shoes for Sophie, and an Ajax football jersey for Nathan. She listened attentively to all their stories about what they had done while she was away, asking detailed questions and laughing at their jokes with genuine enthusiasm. To anyone watching from the outside, we might have seemed like a completely normal family, reuniting after a long separation. Only the occasional tense glances between Victoria and me revealed the underlying truth of our situation. That night, after Sophie and Nathan were finally asleep in their beds, Victoria and I sat at opposite ends of our living room couch. The distance between us felt symbolic of everything that had changed during her 7 weeks away. "Thank you," she began carefully, her voice tentative and uncertain. For not saying anything to the children about what happened in Amsterdam. I didn't do it for you, I replied evenly, keeping my tone completely neutral. I did it for them. They deserve to understand this situation properly when the time is right. Victoria nodded, unconsciously twisting her wedding ring around her finger in a nervous gesture I had seen countless times over our 9 years of marriage. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Now we discuss logistics, I said, meeting her eyes directly. I've retained an attorney and I'm filing for divorce. I'm also requesting primary physical custody of Sophie and Nathan. Her face completely crumpled at my words, as if she had been holding on to some hope that our marriage could still be salvaged. David, please, she begged, her voice breaking. Can't we at least try counseling first? People recover from affairs all the time. I know we can work through this if we just try. It's not fixable, I said firmly, without any hesitation. And honestly, Victoria, I don't think you're actually sorry about what you did. You're sorry you got caught, but you're not sorry about the affairs themselves. Victoria protested vehemently against my assessment, but I held up my hand to stop her from continuing down that path. I had heard enough of her explanations and justifications over the past few weeks. Here's what's going to happen, I continued with calm authority. We're going to tell the kids tomorrow that we're separating. We'll explain that we've grown apart as a couple, but that we still care about each other deeply. Most importantly, we'll emphasize repeatedly that none of this is their fault. Tomorrow? Victoria gasped, her eyes widening in shock. That's way too soon! They just got me back after 7 weeks away. We can't drop this on them immediately. Would you prefer that they figure it out from the obvious tension between us? I asked pointedly. Kids aren't stupid, Victoria. They're already sensing that something was seriously wrong during our encounter in Amsterdam. Victoria buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Part of me, the part that remembered 9 years of marriage and partnership, wanted to reach out and comfort her. It was an automatic reflex that I had to consciously resist. I've prepared a preliminary separation agreement, I continued, maintaining my business-like tone. I'll email it to you tonight so you can review it. You're welcome to have your own attorney look it over if you want, but I think you'll find the terms are fair. In truth, the terms of the separation agreement were more than fair. They were actually quite generous. I wasn't interested in punishing Victoria financially or severely limiting her time with our children. What I wanted most was honesty, stability for Sophie and Nathan, and a clean break from the web of lies that our marriage had become. The next few weeks passed in a blur of painful conversations, legal paperwork, and major adjustments for our entire family. We told the children together exactly as we had planned. Sophie cried when we explained the situation, while Nathan looked confused and asked questions we weren't fully prepared to answer. We did our best to reassure both of them, promising that both parents would always be there for them, even though we wouldn't be living together anymore. Victoria moved into a furnished apartment nearby, which made the transition easier for everyone involved. We established a temporary custody schedule that seemed to work with everyone's needs and schedules. She would have the children on weekends and for dinner on Thursday evenings, while they would spend the rest of their time with me. This arrangement actually worked well with Victoria's demanding job, which still required occasional travel for business. On the surface, our separation appeared to be proceeding quite amicably. We were both committed to putting the children's needs first, and we managed to maintain civil interactions during custody exchanges and school events. But underneath this veneer of cooperation, I was still quietly gathering information and building my case. The private investigator I had hired was methodically confirming my worst suspicions. That one night in Boston had actually been an ongoing affair with a colleague that lasted several months. Additionally, there were suspicious patterns and behaviors that suggested inappropriate relationships with at least 2 other men over the past 4 years of our marriage. Meanwhile, Victoria seemed to be living in complete denial about the finality of our separation. She continued to suggest family dinners for the kids' sake and proposed weekend outings where we could all be together. She brought up the possibility of marriage counseling in nearly every conversation we had. I maintained polite but firm boundaries, making it clear that while we would always be co-parents, our romantic relationship was permanently over. 3 months after Victoria's return from Amsterdam, her company announced their annual gala. This was always a prestigious event, attended by executives, researchers, and important industry partners from around the world. For someone with Victoria's career ambitions, it was a crucial networking opportunity that could significantly impact her professional trajectory. During one of our routine custody handoffs, Victoria approached me with an unexpected request. I know this might be awkward, she began hesitantly. But would you consider attending the gala with me as my date? It would mean a lot to me professionally, and I think it would look better if we presented a united front. I looked at her incredulously. We're not united, Victoria, I reminded her firmly. We're separated and in the process of divorcing. There's no united front to present. No one at work knows that yet, she admitted, her voice dropping slightly. I haven't told anyone about our separation. People will ask questions if I show up alone to such an important company event. I considered her request carefully, weighing the implications. What she was asking was fundamentally manipulative. She wanted to use her career advancement as leverage while continuing to conceal our separation from her colleagues. But at the same time, her request presented an opportunity I hadn't anticipated, one that could serve my own purposes. Fine, I agreed finally after a long pause. One last event for closure. Victoria's face immediately lit up with relief, and I could see a spark of hope in her eyes that made me uncomfortable. Thank you so much, she said, reaching out to touch my arm. This really means everything to me. It's black tie next Saturday at the Breakers, she continued, her excitement growing. Just like the old days. I remember how these events work, I said simply, pulling away from her touch. During the week leading up to the gala, I finalized certain arrangements that Victoria knew nothing about. I confirmed key details with my attorney and made sure everything was in place for what I had planned. Then I rented an appropriate tuxedo and prepared myself mentally for what would be our final public appearance as a married couple. On the night of the gala, I arranged for my parents to watch Sophie and Nathan, and I took an Uber to the Breakers rather than driving myself. Victoria and I had agreed to meet in the hotel lobby rather than arrive together, which seemed appropriate given our circumstances. When I saw Victoria that evening, I had to admit she looked absolutely stunning. She was wearing an elegant navy blue gown, and her blonde hair was swept up in a sophisticated style that highlighted her features beautifully. When she spotted me across the lobby, her face lit up with a genuine smile that momentarily made my heart ache for what we had lost. Or rather, for what I had thought we once had. You look very handsome, she said when I reached her, automatically reaching up to straighten my bow tie in a gesture that felt painfully familiar. You look beautiful, I replied honestly, because she did. Ready? She asked, slipping her hand into the crook of my arm. I nodded, and together we entered the ballroom. We were immediately surrounded by Victoria's colleagues, all congratulating her enthusiastically on the successful Amsterdam project. I played my assigned role perfectly, the supportive husband engaging in industry small talk, laughing at jokes I barely understood, and generally creating the picture of marital harmony that Victoria wanted her colleagues to see. Throughout the evening, Victoria stayed close to my side, her hand frequently finding mine or resting comfortably on my arm. She was clearly creating the picture of marital harmony and partnership that she wanted her professional colleagues to witness. I could see how important this image was to her career, and I played along flawlessly. During the dinner portion of the evening, Victoria's boss gave an elaborate speech praising the Amsterdam partnership and specifically highlighting Victoria's exceptional leadership throughout the project. She received a thunderous round of applause from the entire ballroom as she was called up to say a few words about the experience. None of this would have been possible without the incredible support of my amazing husband David, she said, raising her champagne glass in my direction. He held down the fort with our 2 wonderful children while I was away for 7 long weeks in Amsterdam. More enthusiastic applause followed, along with approving smiles and nods from the wives and husbands in attendance who had made similar sacrifices for their partners' demanding careers. I smiled and acknowledged the recognition, playing my part perfectly. After dinner, the dancing portion of the evening began, and Victoria led me to the dance floor for a slow song. She wrapped her arms around my neck in the familiar way she used to, creating an intimate bubble around us, despite being surrounded by hundreds of people. Thank you for doing this tonight, she whispered close to my ear. It means absolutely everything to me. Are you enjoying yourself? I asked, genuinely curious about her state of mind. More than I have in months, she admitted, her voice filled with emotion. It feels like the old times, like how things used to be between us. As the evening progressed, Victoria grew increasingly affectionate and hopeful. I could see it clearly in her eyes and body language. She genuinely thought this night was some kind of turning point in our relationship. She believed this elegant evening was a step toward reconciliation, a sign that we might be able to rebuild what had been broken. That made what was about to happen all the more devastating. At precisely 10:45 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text message. It was the signal I had been waiting for all evening. I checked the message discreetly and confirmed that everything was ready and in place. "Excuse me for just a moment," I said to Victoria, who was chatting animatedly with a group of her colleagues. "I need to make a quick call. I'll be right back." I stepped outside the ballroom and confirmed that all the final preparations had been completed exactly as planned. Then I returned to find Victoria, who was still glowing from the success of the evening and the positive attention she had received. "Can we talk privately for a moment?" I asked, gesturing toward a quiet corner of the venue away from the crowd. She followed me eagerly, probably assuming I wanted to share some intimate moment or express how much I had enjoyed the evening. Her eyes were bright with anticipation and hope. "What is it?" she asked when we reached the secluded area, her voice filled with expectation. "I wanted to let you know that I'm leaving now," I said calmly, watching her expression carefully. Her smile immediately faltered, replaced by confusion. "Already? But the night's just getting started. The CEO is expected to make a surprise announcement about promotions very soon." "I'm aware of that," I replied evenly, "but I have somewhere else I need to be." She frowned, clearly not understanding what could possibly be more important than this career-defining evening. "What could be more important than being here with me tonight?" "The truth," I replied simply. I pulled out my phone and showed Victoria the screen, which displayed a live stream of our home living room. Her eyes widened in shock as she recognized the group of people gathered there. Her parents, her sister, my brother, and several of our closest friends. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible as the reality of the situation began to dawn on her. "I invited everyone who matters in our lives to hear the truth about why our marriage ended," I explained calmly. "The live stream starts in exactly 4 minutes. I thought you might want to be there in person to participate in the conversation, but I understand if you'd rather stay here and maintain your professional appearances." The color completely drained from Victoria's face as she processed what I was telling her. "You wouldn't actually do this," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I wouldn't what?" "I am doing this," I corrected her firmly. "I've spent months listening to you minimize and downplay your betrayal. I've watched you manipulate our friends and family with vague explanations about how we simply grew apart as a couple. Tonight, everyone is going to hear what really happened." "Please," she begged, gripping my arm desperately. "Not like this. Think about the children. What will this do to them?" "The children are with my parents' neighbor tonight, watching a movie and having a sleepover," I replied. "They won't be anywhere near this conversation. This is strictly for the adults in our lives." "Think about my job then," she pleaded, her voice rising with panic. "If word of this gets out in my professional circles, it could destroy everything I've worked for." "You should have thought about that before you brought me here tonight as your prop," I interrupted. "You should have considered the consequences before you publicly thanked me for holding down the fort while you were actually having an affair with Dr. Rodriguez in Amsterdam." Tears began filling her eyes as the full scope of what was about to happen hit her. "I'll do anything you want," she said desperately. "Please don't do this to me, to us, to our families." I checked my watch and saw that time was running short. "You have about 3 minutes to get an Uber if you want to be there to defend yourself and tell your side of the story," I said matter-of-factly. "Your choice entirely." With that, I turned and walked away from her, leaving Victoria frozen in that corner of the elegant venue. I didn't look back as I exited the ballroom, left the hotel, and ultimately walked away from the remains of our marriage for the final time. I arrived home just as everyone was settling into our living room, looking confused but curious about the urgent gathering I had called. I had told them only that I had an important announcement to make regarding my marriage to Victoria, without giving any specific details about what they were about to hear. Victoria didn't show up, which honestly didn't surprise me. I had expected her to choose her career and public image over facing the consequences of her actions. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," I began, standing in front of our assembled friends and family members. "I know there have been a lot of questions about what's been happening between Victoria and me, and I felt it was time you all heard the complete truth." I proceeded to tell them everything: the Amsterdam business trip, our surprise visit to see her, her confession of multiple affairs, and the systematic deception that had been going on for years. I showed them select photographs that the private investigator had obtained, showing Victoria with various men over the past several years. All of the images were time-stamped and completely indisputable. There were audible gasps, tears, and expressions of shock throughout the room. Victoria's mother covered her face with her hands, while her sister stared in complete disbelief. The friends who had known us as a couple for years struggled to process this information. "I'm not sharing this information to be vindictive or to hurt Victoria unnecessarily," I explained to the room full of shocked faces. I'm sharing it because I'm tired of living with lies. I'm tired of carrying this burden alone, and I'm frankly tired of the implications that this separation was somehow mutual, or that I wasn't committed enough to making our marriage work. One of Victoria's close friends stood up from her chair, clearly uncomfortable with what she was hearing. This is just one side of the story, she said defensively. We should hear Victoria's version of events before making any judgments about the situation. I completely agree with you, I replied calmly. That's exactly why I invited her to be here tonight to share her perspective. She chose not to come. As if perfectly timed by fate, the front door suddenly burst open at that exact moment. Victoria stormed into the house, still wearing her elegant gala dress, but with mascara streaked down her cheeks. She had made it after all, though clearly not by choice. "How dare you!" she screamed, advancing toward me with fury radiating from every part of her body. "How dare you ambush me like this?" Our friends and family sat in stunned silence as Victoria unleashed her rage. She called me manipulative, vindictive, and cruel. She accused me of overreacting to what she called a few mistakes. She claimed I was trying to destroy her reputation out of pure spite and revenge. I let her rant and rave until she finally ran out of steam and stood there breathing heavily. Then I calmly asked the question that would end this charade once and for all. "Are you denying the affairs, Victoria?" She stopped mid-sentence, suddenly becoming acutely aware of her audience. She looked around the room at all the faces watching her parents, her sister, friends who had been in our wedding party, people who had known us as a couple for years. "I made some mistakes," she finally said, her voice much quieter now. "But David is making this seem much worse than it actually was." "How many affairs were there, Victoria?" I asked directly. "Total number, the whole truth." She stared at me with pure hatred, realizing that her attempts at minimization and damage control weren't working. "You know what? Fine," she said with bitter resignation. "4? There were 4 different affairs? Are you happy now?" The room collectively inhaled sharply. Her mother let out a soft whimper of shock and disappointment. The number was even higher than what I had suspected. "No," I said sadly, feeling the weight of the moment. "I'm not happy at all. I haven't been happy since I saw you with another man while our daughter was counting down the days until you came home from Amsterdam." What followed was 2 hours of the most painful conversation I've ever been part of. There were questions from family members who were trying to understand how this had happened. There were tearful explanations from Victoria that gradually shifted from defensive to remorseful as the reality of her situation began to sink in. There were expressions of support for both of us, despite the difficult circumstances we were all navigating. By the end of the evening, everyone was emotionally exhausted. People began to leave in pairs and small groups, offering hugs and whispered words of encouragement to both Victoria and me. Despite everything that had happened, our friends and family wanted us to know they still loved and supported us both. Finally, only Victoria and I remained in the living room that had once been the heart of our family home. The silence between us was heavy with the weight of everything that had been said and revealed. "Was all this really necessary?" Victoria asked, her voice hoarse from crying and shouting. The fight had completely gone out of her, and she looked deflated and exhausted. "Yes," I said simply, without hesitation. "It absolutely was necessary." "But why?" she pressed. "Not as revenge, but because secrets fester and grow worse over time. Because I refuse to be portrayed as the villain in the story you're rewriting about our marriage. And because the people who love us deserve to know the truth about what happened." Victoria nodded slowly, finally seeming to understand the gravity of what had transpired. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now we continue with the divorce proceedings as planned," I replied. "We co-parent our children as best we can, and we both move forward with complete honesty from this point on." "You've destroyed my reputation," she said bitterly, the anger creeping back into her voice. "No, Victoria," I corrected her firmly. "You did that yourself with your choices and actions. I just refuse to help you hide it anymore." It's been 7 months since that dramatic night, and our divorce was finally finalized just last week. As I had expected, the judge awarded me primary physical custody of Sophie and Nathan, with Victoria having the children every other weekend and 1 evening per week. The custody arrangement reflects both the documented affairs and my established role as the primary caregiver. Victoria was ultimately passed over for the director promotion she had been working toward, though she managed to keep her current position. Apparently, some of her colleagues had heard rumors about the real reason behind her success with the Amsterdam project. Office politics can be just as unforgiving as they are hypocritical. And Victoria learned that lesson the hard way. As for me, I've settled into a new routine with Sophie and Nathan that works well for all of us. We have dinner together every single night, and I've become surprisingly adept at things like French braids and science fair projects. The kids are adjusting well to our new normal, though they still have questions and occasional moments of sadness about the changes in our family structure. We're all participating in family therapy to help us navigate this transition. It's been incredibly helpful in teaching us how to communicate about difficult topics and process our emotions in healthy ways. The therapist has been particularly good at helping Sophie and Nathan understand that none of this was their fault. Victoria and I now communicate primarily through a co-parenting app, which keeps our interactions civil but appropriately distant. Our conversations focus strictly on the children's needs, schedules, and activities. She's apparently dating someone new, not Dr. Rodriguez or any of her previous affair partners, as far as I know. I'm not ready to start dating again yet, but I'm open to the possibility that someday I might be. For now, I'm focused on being the best father I can be and rebuilding my sense of self after everything that happened. Some people have criticized my actions as excessive or vindictive. They've told me I should have handled the situation more privately, that the public exposure wasn't necessary or fair to Victoria. But here's what I know to be true. Lies don't simply disappear when they're hidden away. They grow, they spread, and they poison everything around them. By bringing the truth into the light, yes, dramatically and perhaps painfully, I freed not only myself, but also Victoria from the web of deception she had created. Whether she recognizes that fact or not is her journey to make, not mine. I don't regret my decision to expose the truth, not for a single moment. Not when Sophie asks me difficult questions about trust and honesty, and I can answer her without any sense of hypocrisy or shame. Not when Nathan sees that his father stood up for himself with dignity and refused to be walked all over. And certainly not when I look in the mirror each morning and finally see a man who refused to be complicit in his own betrayal. What I did wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. It was about reclaiming my integrity, my self-respect, and my right to live authentically without covering up someone else's lies. Edit. Wow, this blew up overnight. Thanks for all the supportive comments and messages. To address some of the most common questions I've been getting. First, yes, the divorce settlement was financially fair. I didn't try to take her to the cleaners, because ultimately, doing so would have hurt my children's quality of life, and they didn't deserve to suffer financially because of their mother's choices. Second, no. I don't recommend this approach for everyone dealing with infidelity. Every situation is different, and what worked for me might not be appropriate for others. Each person needs to handle their circumstances in the way that feels right for them. Third, the kids are doing really well overall. They know a simplified, age-appropriate version of why we divorced. We've been honest with them about the fact that mommy made some choices that hurt daddy's feelings very badly, but we've emphasized that sometimes adults make mistakes and that both parents still love them very much. Fourth, for those asking if we're in Florida because of my mention of no-fault divorce laws, yes, we are. But I won't be more specific than that for privacy and safety reasons. Thanks again for all the support during what has been the most difficult period of my life. Reading your comments and knowing that people understand why I made the choices I did has been incredibly validating. It's helped me feel confident that I handled this situation with as much integrity as possible under very challenging circumstances. For anyone else going through something similar, trust your instincts, document everything, and don't let anyone convince you to carry the burden of someone else's lies. You deserve better than that, and so do your children.